everyone. Welcome to another live today. I am here with Dr. Michael Allen, who is an educator and principal in the Chicago area. We're going to talk about using adversity to find purpose. And I'm really excited for this today. Before we jump in, we're going to go ahead and do our acknowledgement like we do. So we recognize that we occupy stolen indigenous land. I am currently occupying the Seminole and Tequesta territories. Michael, would you like to say what territories you're on?
Yes, thank you. And I currently occupy the Kickapoo, Peoria, Potawatomi, and Miami indigenous territories.
Thank you so much for doing that. I also like to pay respect to our Black brothers and sisters whose ancestors were enslaved for this country, the LGBTQ plus community who remind us to fight for love, people who are differently abled, who remain at the fight of their own rights and invisible sometimes, and all the immigrants who've contributed to this building of this country and currently do. Essential workers who are out there in the fields right now, like fighting COVID-19 and keeping this country running as much as we can. And anyone else I forgot, like this, there's a lot of people who have sacrificed a lot for the United States. So thank you so much. All right, we'll jump right in. So Michael, why don't you tell us about yourself and what you do?
Sure. So I guess I want to start by just thanking you for the opportunity to share a little bit about myself and this platform. I really love the work that you're doing and the support that you're putting out there for marginalized groups. So as it relates to me, so for me, I would probably consider myself an educator, a teacher, a panelist, blogger, and more recently, a book author. My brother and I are at the last few weeks of publishing our first collective book called Brotherly Love. It's just a journey of our struggle to success. And, you know, in short, I would say everything that I do falls into my purpose, which is to be a voice for and empower marginalized people. That's pretty much who I am. I've been a lifelong educator, so spent going into my 15th year in education, 13 as a principal of some sort. And so I've just been fortunate to be an ambassador for marginalized people in the form of education at this phase of my life so far. That would probably be how I describe me and my work at this point in life.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And I'm really excited to dive into this work because it's amazing. So we'll start with, you have a really powerful story that got you to this point in your career. And so I'd love to hear you share about any part of that you'd love to share with our group.
Sure. I always like sharing a piece into, over the years, I've taken time to just kind of capture the raw emotions and experiences and perspectives that I had when as a kid, as a teenager, as a young adult, and then as a veteran in the field right now. So I would like to, if it's okay, to share probably a 2 to 3 minute piece of just specific experience about what I learned as a childhood by seeing the different things that were going on in my household and community. Is that fine? Okay. So the piece that I would like to share is called My First Heartbreak. It's important because this is really the emotion that was connected to this heartbreak is the emotion that I feel was triggered at several points over the course of my life in different experiences. And it was important for me to be able to trace it back to this in order to be able to overcome it and utilize it to support my gift and my purpose. So it's called My First Heartbreak. It's short. It was a blistering cold December afternoon, just 2 days past Christmas to be exact. The frost lined the windows of my family's apartment in the projects in Zion, Illinois. Since I am the second oldest of my parents' 5 children, I feel like I should have seen the writing on the walls, but I didn't because no one could tell me about my dad. He failed my older brother Gil a few times, but somehow I thought this time it would be different with me because I wasn't asking for much. But I was mistaken, just as the rest of my siblings were. My father was the first person to ever break my heart. I will never forget the call on my birthday when he promised to pick me up for ice cream. He never came. As I sat in the windowsill next to the frost, my sweatshirt was drenched in tears of pain, isolation, and loneliness that entered my body and stayed with me for nearly 20 years. As I reflect, I just needed my father to make time for me, to tell me that I mattered to him. And I needed him to tell me that he loved me. I needed to hear his voice tell me that he was proud of my report card and my performance at countless track meets, math competitions, basketball games, football games, and so much more. But he never came, not one time. So I think it's important to share that story because what I learned in that authentic experience is that that was my first indoctrination into the dysfunction that really for many of my years governed my life. That dysfunction is what caused me to express myself as a young adult and as a teenager and fight through fighting and trying my best, not trying my best in games, math competitions. I became fearful of showing people who I really was because I thought that they would leave me just like my dad did. When I was a kid, I thought power was about displaying physical prowess through my arms, abs, and legs. But as I left college, I thought it was all about outthinking others. So as I sit here today, I believe and know that power is about vulnerability and humility more than anything else. I think it's about the delicate but relentless commitment to healing oneself before attempting to help others. And I believe that it's about advocating for marginalized people through healing ourselves. So when we strip away our own judgment, insecurity, pain, and fears, there's a silver lining that authentically links us to the purest humanity of others. When I unpeeled back my labels of privilege, what I noticed underneath cisgender, male, heterosexual, smart, athletic, educated, and so many others was just Michael sitting there in the mirror. I had to see a fragile me, a scared boy, a kid who peed in the bed because I was afraid of the mice and roaches that occupied my family's hallway in the projects, the shy teen who was afraid to love and to be loved because I thought all relationships would end with babies, irremovable scars, and bruises. I saw hundreds of other images of my firsthand accounts of trauma that I endured over the course of my childhood, and I felt helpless again. I couldn't make it stop, just like I couldn't make the system stop from beating my father and my mother with drugs, and then my father from beating my mother, and my father from beating my oldest brother. I stood there the first moment that I confronted my fears, my insecurity, and everything that stopped me from getting to where I was as a boy inside a 31-year-old man. And I was emotionally constipated. And I cried until I went to sleep. Then I cried more on my way to work and sometimes on my way home. A combination of therapy and mindfulness meditation practices helped me to figure out and find a security in my experiences and journey. I found real and lasting strength in the form of vulnerability and humility. I've learned firsthand the value of developing and acknowledging emotional intelligence or EQ. The moment that I started to accept that I am lovable, I began to become more meaningful, purposeful, and authentically connected to those whom I lead. My journey, as difficult as it has been a beautiful struggle that has enabled me to use the adversity that I've endured over the course of my life to find a purpose. I learned that while my physical skills can allow me to entertain a stadium full of people, it's my emotional talents and my character that can allow me to empower the masses. I stopped seeing what I lacked and started focusing on the power of the journey in my story. It is my duty to use my voice to inspire the people who come from places like me. So that would probably be just a summary of my journey to where I am today, and my place and vulnerability and its power in my life.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. That was really powerful. And I just think any person, but especially a Black man sharing that level of vulnerability is so powerful. So thank you so much. And it's clear that through your life journey and your healing, you found that vulnerability is a key part of your ability to move forward. Can you speak more to that, especially in your position as an educator?
Sure. What I realized is just each time I found myself disconnected from supporting people, what ultimately was the common factor was some sort of emotional blockage. So I always have to remind myself that whatever it is that's not connecting to other people is something that's broken or unfixed in me. It's some type of pain or emotional experience that I hadn't given myself permission to lean into, and as a result, it's impacting my ability to connect with and empower others, which is my life's work. So I've always had to be willing to risk who I am for what I hope to become. And what I found at each mountain, if you will, is whatever is waiting for me on the other side is more important than what's holding me back right now, and that fear that infiltrates my body. Today, I see myself as an educator, more importantly for my staff and students and parents, as a person who gives people permission to be their purest selves. And I don't want people to restrict the purest parts of their humanity. But growing up with all these labels, and I named them earlier, like being a cisgender male, super athletic, smart, popular, all these different things, it's been easy for me to just buy into the system without thinking about the impact and the harm that has on others. Who may identify of a different gender, binary, who may come from a different faith, who may come from a range of different things that may have been blind spots for me over the course of my life. But in order to empower others, I think we have to be truly connected to them. And oftentimes we don't explore the emotions that are going on in our bodies that restrict that. So that's probably been the most powerful thing about vulnerability. And it's sort of become the foundation of my leadership, and has launched me into my work with the book with my brother. And then also the idea that has really pushed my blog with Random Acts of Vulnerability, and being able to center the power of vulnerability and how that empowers humanity. And so I see it today as the cornerstone to leadership, which has led to some of my recent posts and piece about that. I don't know if that directly speaks to what you were alluding to.
And I love, well, what I'm hearing in all of you said is that, like, if we're not vulnerable with ourselves, then how can we help others show up vulnerable for themselves? And that permission that being vulnerable allows. And I personally experienced that as a leader. And I think I'd love to hear you speak more about how being vulnerable has let you become a good leader.
Sure. I think what I have realized is, and this is sort of led to a recent piece that I read. So one of my current posts is about revolutionary leadership, and it's essentially of this radical notion of being able to express your emotions to yourself, and in particular through this scheme of healing. So as I see, if I'm in a conversation with a colleague or someone on my team, and there's some extreme emotion that infiltrates my body, I'm curious about what's going on, because usually at work it's nothing that's that serious. But I have started to recognize that it traces back to my childhood. That was the reason why I shared the piece about my father, and that being my first heartbreak. Is each time that I've experienced heartbreak, it's the same intensity of emotion that I experienced with my dad. Well, the reality is that the heartbreak isn't that. It's that's being triggered. And that's not fair to have that expectation for myself or another person who I may be going through a situation with. And I think that same concept, in a sense, applies to work, in that if there is a person who's coming in and needs my support and leadership, and I'm so caught up on the mountain of judgment that I'm not connecting with where they are, then it's hard for me to build capacity in them and to support them to where they're supposed to go, which has a direct harm on kids. And so, I've been a principal since I was 24 years old. So I can certainly remember how I thought everyone should meet my standard and do things precisely the way I did, that everyone should be invested and live in the school until past dinner time. And I had a specific standard that fit my personality and my experiences in life, that didn't necessarily encompass the real and valuable experiences of the people whom I was charged to lead. And so I made a lot of mistakes in my early 20s with leadership, but I was always reflective the entire time of, okay, this is what I wanted to do, this was my intent behind that, but this is what the outcome was. And so by the time I reached my 30s, I had an experience as an assistant principal where I found myself suspending Black and brown kids in the name of law and order, calling myself building culture in the school. And ultimately what I found out is that in that moment, in that situation, in that experience, I had become the system. Everything that I hated about the system was a part of how I was leading at that point in time. And so that sort of sent me on this journey that I'm on now, and that if my goal and my purpose is to empower people, then how can I let go of what I've been indoctrinated into to find out who I really am, for the sake of being a voice, for being able to see the purest parts of who my people are, people of color, marginalized groups all across the country in every form, as a part of my work. And so in order to do that effectively, I've had to give up so much, but the reward on the other side has been truly gratifying. So, but the central piece in each element of that has been my ability to be vulnerable with me, heal from the things that have gone on. And then there's been a natural ripple effect with those in which I've lead. So I give people permission to be who they are. You don't have to be afraid of failing because I'm going to be there to support you throughout that process. I understand the different things that are going to go on in life today. And I also understand how the power of the intersectionality behind each of our stories and experiences being able to empower the collective. So that's sort of how vulnerability has brought me to where I am today and in my work in schools. We're building school cultures in various settings, receiving a number of awards that I don't think are about me. They're much more about the collective piece of our teams at various points in time. And so I'm just grateful to be a part of that process and to have gone through so much to find out what's really important for me and marginalized people.
I, it's invaluable to talk about, as a leader, making mistakes, as a leader, showing up, and especially as a marginalized leader, finding yourself part of the system all of a sudden. Like, how did I get here? How am I now doing the things that I feel like hurt me when I was younger, or the things that have held me back? Now I'm doing those actively. And like you said, it's just that process of vulnerability and an awareness of yourself and showing up and seeing yourself, that you say like, oh, wow, okay, I need to take a step back and reevaluate the way I'm interacting with this system. And that, I think, like, even just hearing someone come forward and like owning those mistakes and owning how that happened is really, really important. So thank you for doing that and speaking to that. And I mean, speaking of like, systems or boxes or stuff, and you talked about your labels, as a cis man, like, what are some barriers you experience in coming in touch with your vulnerability? Because I know that that's something that happens.
Yeah. So the biggest thing that I would say is I had stereotypical images of what it meant to be a man. Um, and by that I mean I was always very athletic. I was super strong, played football, all the way through middle school and high school, and then again in college. And so I had these very skewed perspectives of what it meant to be powerful. And I talked about that earlier. This idea that I sort of saw power as being expressed in my physical nature and didn't recognize the blockages that were there for me, and then the impact that has on others. And that wasn't just limited to the stereotypical things about how to protect people. There was also the perceptions around sexuality, the perspectives around gender identification. There was just a lot of blind spots that I think were connected to a lot of the different, in many cases, just ignorance from my childhood and my experiences. But as a cisgender male, I feel like, we live in a country in the Western, particularly in the Western world, that centers male cisgender privilege, particularly as a heterosexual, as stereotypical things. And I think it's rooted in insecurity. And for me, I've been able to uncover that over the course of my journey. As I've been able to look into the mirror, I've been able to kind of explore and ask myself questions like, okay, who am I? How do I know that? What evidence do I have to directly support that? And then what does that mean for me in terms of moving forward? And so I like to think that unpacking the problems of my cisgender identification and indoctrination has helped me unlock a lot of the journey and foundational skills that I've developed as it relates to vulnerability. Because had I not been able to see myself for who I really was, and it's just been much easier to accept the system and actually be willing to risk hurting other people. And that's something I wasn't really willing to do. So that was what it really boiled down to. And I often have to ask myself, when I'm fighting the next transition, okay, am I pro-humanity or not? Because if my work is really about marginalized groups, then I have to think about humanity at all spectrums. And so as a person who grew up in the Baptist church as a Christian, it was easy for me to accept cisgender people, particularly folks who identified as heterosexual in various norms. And then over time, there were certain aspects of the gender, of the sexuality identification that I started to see according to my experiences. But it was tough because I felt like at different phases, it wasn't my work to be a person to support people who came from experiences that I felt like at that point in time looked different than mine. I understand that there's intersectionality now, but I didn't at certain phases of my journey. And so, I mean, that's ultimately what I would say has been the biggest piece. Is just there's nothing, as I became more secure, there was nothing to lose in order to empower others. And that was what I think when I was younger and definitely naive around the perspectives of empowerment, that's what I was afraid of. I was afraid of something being lost from me through empowering other people who came from different places that were similar to mine.
I the first thing that I think of when you talk about that is this idea that we got somewhere. I don't know where we got this idea, but that if I'm shining, that takes away from someone else shining. And I have no idea where that came from. I mean, I'm sure we could figure that out, but it's just not true. The more we all shine, like we shine bright together, you
Yep,
know, and it's not a competition, you know, and I think that that's something I love about this particular group is that I'm trying to highlight amazing leaders in this group, and it doesn't take away from my own leadership. If anything, it makes us both better leaders, you know?
absolutely.
And I also, it's amazing that you talk about the religious background, because I think that that is something that we are struggling with, especially like in the BLM movement, with people who um, are still dealing with homophobia and not able to include that intersectional view when we're talking about uplifting the Black community.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, can you talk more about how you got to where you are? And are you still practicing your religion and how those two have come together for you?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So that's a good question. What I would say is so much of my life's work has been centered on kids, and so kids are just kids, and they're easy. They've always been easy for me to love, and so my barriers to being able to connect with, um, initially understanding trans people, being able to understand the binary of gender identification, but also understanding that everyone deserves to be who they are. Um, and as I became more clear around the biological nature of who we are as human beings, the fact of how indoctrination into the system that we have is that's rooted in racism and marginalization, it restricts people's access to being able to accept who they are. As I started to understand things more, it was very clear to me that, and I stabilized my own hurt and my own pain, because my big issue as a cisgender heterosexual male was that I envied the expression that homosexual or gay men were able to, queer men were able to express. So for me, I kind of felt like I had to identify as either calculated and strong, or angry. But I never had the ability to express the range of emotions that I've had over the course of my life as a heterosexual male. The reality is I did, but that was my indoctrination. And so there was this sort of secret or undercover envy of queer men. Um, and so as I started to understand my uncomfort with that, and have had the love and accountability of so many mentors over the course of my life, from people like Corey Wallace, who've been able to lean in and kind of help me make sense of unique equity work. And as I've uncovered my healing, or my pain, I should say, I've been able to invest in the healing through knowledge, number one, but also things like mindfulness, meditation, and therapy. And so I've been able to identify exactly what it was that was a problem for me. And as I was able to heal, it was clear to understand the value of empowering, appreciating, and holding space for everyone's journey. Because I think we're all at the end of it, we're all a part of the human struggle. And that's really what it's been my secret. Now I still consider myself a Christian. However, I wouldn't call myself a religious person. I would call myself a spiritual person. I believe in the word. But I think more important than anything, we all are called to be living testimonies of empowering and loving humanity, all of us in different forms. And there's nothing about what I believe that's about restricting and or judging and trying to marginalize others of any spectrum, regardless of gender identification, regardless of sexual orientation. Nothing about what I believe says that I'm on a hill that's better than someone else. And it's my responsibility to ensure that we all have a voice and are treated as such.
I am so happy someone like you with that humanity and like you said, like focus on not marginalizing, like minimizing harm is in a leadership position like yours around children, and especially in like the Chicago area. I mean, it's just really empowering to hear and talk to someone who is leading children in this way, with your background. I just want you to know that it's really great to hear. And people are in here saying like, this is powerful, really good question, powerful statements you're making, excellent response. So I just want to, give you that for a moment. So in this moment, with so much going on with BLM, with COVID, what is the most important thing for leadership, from your perspective, like for us to be focusing on?
Yeah, so I would probably say in short, and then I'll come back to and kind of name something I think is important. It's one of my current pieces through Random Acts of Vulnerability, is 7 habits that I think leaders should consider right now. But I think the biggest pieces, if you will, number one, the importance of mental health and healing. So oftentimes what I found that leaders do of all walks of life, regardless of race, we go to technical space because it's something we can have control over. I can go look at my calendar and see how many things I checked off based upon what I accomplished today. I can see who called me. I can see who met these deadlines, but I don't give myself permission to gauge what's going on inside of my body. And that could allow us to have tension and pain and pressure that ultimately impacts what's going on. The problem with doing that now is that it's impacting everything. And one person could be one experience or one job loss or one conversation away from really losing it. And so I think that it makes it incumbent upon us as leaders to really center and lift up the value of mental health, because it gives people permission to have peace and happiness in their personal lives as well as in their professional lives. And I think that's probably the most paramount piece. The other piece is also pushing different types of mindfulness meditation practices or breathing exercises in the workplace, like lifting that up, whether it be modeling and or putting in infrastructure. So much of my current work has been around training school leaders and teachers and systems perspectives on the value of strengthening learning environments in schools and other places through using mindfulness as a meditative solution. So I think it's very important to do that. I kind of push folks to think about things like Calm app, of course, Liberate, which is a very, very powerful meditation app that centers people of color, and then Insight Timer, which is one of my favorites as well. So I think meditation is something that's important along with mental health. And then I think, of course, the whole point of my work is vulnerability. So the 7 habits that I would highlight that are centered in my most current piece, that I think leaders should consider. Number one, the importance of encouraging people to speak their truth in the workplace. That's something that I think is invaluable. And we need to be able to hold space for that, even when it's different than ours. 2 would be normalizing vulnerability through sharing our mistakes and imperfections. So I think we have to explicitly name what it is that we've missed the mark on, so that people can see that we're holding ourselves accountable in front of them. The next one, or the third one, would be learning side by side with our team. So I think there's a time as a leader to be the person up front teaching, but there's also a time to sit down and know that you don't understand the information and learn it side by side with your team. And that humility is invaluable for taking teams to the next level during these uncertain times. Number 4 would be developing meaningful relationships with our teams. So really being able to go beyond the surface level and connect with the people who are on our teams, because when you understand what makes people tick and they understand what makes you tick, there's a unique connection that fortifies you all to the purpose in a very empowering way. 5 would be knowing the difference between constructive criticism and judgment. The point of being able to give feedback to people is to actually teach them, not to judge them and stand on a mountain that's higher than where they are. But being able to get side by side with people and let them know that you're here to support them. Your goal is to help them get to the next phase, as opposed to try to do something that's going to compromise their ability to provide for their households and their livelihood. 6 is apologize. That's probably the most powerful one that I think as leaders we don't take advantage of enough. I think the most powerful 3 words that I say regularly to my staff members is, I'm sorry. And I mean it. I'm not saying it as a point to shift the perspective or the narrative, but to really just let them know that I missed the mark in that area. And that's another way that I hold myself accountable for being able to be there for them. And finally, the piece that has really been invaluable to me at this phase of my life is just finding peace by staying focused on the present moment. So that goes back to meditation, but that's the indirect impact of the value of meditation, is that it's not, you can understand what's going on with your body in real time in discussions and interactions with other people, and then have the opportunity to either empower those emotions, and or regulate them in a way so that you can hold space for people and allow them to have space for their humanity to be able to be at the forefront of the situation. So those are the 7 pieces that I think, or the 7 habits of highly revolutionary leaders, is what I would say. That's what I call it, at least. But those are the things I think leaders have to be aware of today, now more than ever, because people are coming in with different types of things, and we don't have the ability to try to hold it together in the way that we have before. And if leaders aren't sensitive to that, then I think we're asking people to be machines, but we're not that way. People are person. We're all people. And we need to have a system and infrastructure that allows us to be our most authentic selves at work. And if we can't be that there, then I think it makes sense to be in another place where we can be that.
So is that, did you give me this link, or do you want to post a link to this?
Um,
I got your blog link, but I'm not sure if that particular post is in there, but I think people are probably going to want to know where to find that info. That was beautifully written and said.
Drop it in the chat, then you can share it to everyone.
Yeah, I will share it. And okay, so I'm just going to ask you this one more kind of recent event questions. We all have are biting at our teeth about what's going to happen in the fall for school, and with COVID, and just the education the system has been changing so much with COVID. I'd love to just hear your perspective on and what it's like being an administrator in the education system right now, with everything changing, and what you see coming forward as we deal with the rest of the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, good question. Look, this is probably the perfect time to model vulnerability. The reality is, the truth is that the average administrator, we have no clue. We have gotten a lot of information around the different types of options that are out there, but the big thing that I think is important to kind of illuminate perspective on in this situation is that what's starting to go on, that I want to be a leader that's on the other side of the situation, is that the people at the top are making decisions around what folks who are taking the most risks. By that, I mean marginalized people, be that in the form of parents and students, but also teachers and staff members who are in the school who are taking the most risk. It seems that there's a centralized approach right now. By that, I mean like national level, state level. And they're sort of setting parameters as to the conditions, and I feel like making idle threats as to what should or shouldn't happen. And if we don't come back to school a certain way, then there's funding that's going to be impacted by that. I'm not a proponent of believing it. I think the reality is that the superintendents, the principals, the community members, the teachers, the parents, all of the stakeholders are the people who are most equipped to decide what's the most conducive way to come back to school. And they need to be empowered to be a part of the process to decide. And if it's decided that remote learning is the most responsible thing for everyone included, and it's the safest way to protect everyone, then that needs to be accepted, as opposed to these perspectives of saying, here's what needs to happen, and either you all do it or you don't get the funding that's necessary to run the schools in a meaningful way, or even provide a living for your family. So it's my position that has to be the way that we're looking at it. Having said all that, the options that are on the table are sort of either we come back the way that we had before, which is there's no chance that'll happen, or that we stay remote, which is the most extreme scenario, being removed from school, or a hybrid approach. So there's a number of different ways that the hybrid could work, from cutting down the number of kids who are at school at the same time, having kids travel sort of in like a bubble or pod system, and or stagger the amount of days the kids are even coming to school to begin with. So, I'm a secret proponent of like a 4-day work week for staff members, maybe Monday through Thursday there, and then Friday off, and that's a part of the weekend, and or Friday where kids are home and staff members are home for remote learning. But the truth is that, if I'm being completely transparent, we should know exactly what the expectations will be around the conditions of school within the next 7 to 10 days. but we don't know right now. No one really knows. We're sort of speculating. Even the people who rolled out plans, as COVID continues to unfold, we have to make adjustments that are most responsible for the people who are on the front lines, risking their lives and their safety. So that's probably the biggest thing that I could say about that, though.
Yeah, and I think when we were talking about this before, you highlighted that you're not directly in those decision-making places. So you're just, you know about it, but you're not part of that committee. But I really loved your response. And, what is your focus as a administrator, as an educator right now in the COVID response? Because I thought that was it. No worries. Yeah, you were just talking about how mental health is kind of the mental health effects of COVID are a little bit more where you're focusing, and I think that's a really important place, especially for someone in your role to focus.
Right. So exactly, you pretty much stole my answer. So what I'm choosing to do, and this is what I've done, actually, has been like a comprehensive approach at our school level. I certainly have set the vision, but my entire team, from my social workers, my school psychologists, my assistant principals, and all of my grade level team teachers, have been a part of this movement. But what we've done since COVID has started, all of our staff meetings have been centered on social emotional health. Um, so we're starting with mindfulness. We're going to check in and figure out where people are. We're going to talk about the different things that are going on in the world, how people are feeling about that. We have done a weekly virtual staff sharing circles so people can share the different emotions. It was super effective once we had things go on with Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and Ahmaud Arbery. We were able to, as a staff, wrestle with those different emotions with each other, and also support each other, more importantly, and hold space for them. Um, and then in addition to that, we have mindfulness embedded into the fabric of our school. For this will be the third year where everyone in the entire school takes part in mindfulness. And so we preserve that during this time period. And anytime there's newsletters or different types of links that I'm sending out to parents, the resources are centered on the social emotional health. So what I've told parents the entire time is like, make sure that you're good, make sure that you're healthy, and that your emotional well-being is being able to be regulated in a meaningful way. Because when you're able to do that, it's going to have monumental impacts on what you do for your child. And so that's been what my push has been, just holistically focusing on social emotional health, um, and really centering the entire fabric of our school with that. So with kids, with teachers, and with families. And so for me, that's really been the centerpiece of the success that we've had so far since we transitioned to whatever this new normal is turning into. But that's probably what I would also encourage people, regardless of what field of study that we have, is you just have to really make sure that you are stable and you're good, because that has an impact on everything else, whether it be your family, friends, and other loved ones.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Allen, for sharing all of this and being here today, taking your time for the group for empowering marginalized leaders. Is there any other thoughts you want to share before we end this presentation?
No, I really appreciate you for the opportunity to be able to come on and share so many things that I'm passionate about. I do think the biggest thing that I'm hoping that I'm modeling is just the importance of being able to see, acknowledge, and hold space for all people. And I think it's about time that we stop hiding behind as a society. But I'll pick myself as a cisgender male, behind the stereotypical images of what we've been handed without even knowing the ramifications of. And it's time to start lifting up other people, because I think the value on the other side is beneficial for everyone. And I think that's what we as a collective have been seeking to do since the beginning. And so it's just been important for me to do my part in trying to hold space for others who come from a different background than myself and need to have their voices heard, to be able to hold space for them and to be able to acknowledge the peer's humanity and affirm that in a meaningful way. That's something that's become really, really important for me over the last several years. So, but thank you for this opportunity. I appreciate it. Maybe in the future, we'll be able to do something like this again. So I love the work you're doing. I know that it's powerful, not just in Florida and on the West Coast, but even down South and up here in Chicago and the Midwest as well. So keep doing the amazing work that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Allen, Dr. Michael Allen, everyone. I'm going to post some links as well with this video, and I'll see if you want to pass along any links as well that other than you have. And I just really appreciate you modeling, and really, I think it can get overwhelming to know where your place lands. And I think the simplest answer, like you've said, is it's with yourself. Start with yourself. Work on your own vulnerability, your own emotional intelligence, your own ability, your own leadership style, and then the rest will come. And I think that's a wonderful, wonderful piece of advice. So thank you so much for your time. I hope everyone has a good Saturday, the rest of their Saturday and weekend, and we'll talk soon. Bye,
My
everyone.
pleasure. Take care.
Bye.